So happy to be here. And we are going to talk about thinking. That's something we all do, but it's amazing how little we understand what thinking really is. So these slides have no copyright. And if you think that the content is interesting and you would like to give the presentation either to your workplace or your family, you have my contact information on this very first slide. Send me some email and I'll be happy to send you the PowerPoint. If we don't get to your questions, we will have time for some questions at the end, but if we don't get to yours, please send me some email. Ask your questions later. I'm happy to have a conversation about thinking. And let's connect on LinkedIn. So thinking, fast and slow. Is that what you do? Is this what you do all day? You sit, you stare at a screen, you work on a problem. Is that thinking? Is that what you get paid for? How about, oh no, an online meeting? How much time are we spending on Zoom meetings these days? Is anyone thinking? As we stare at each other in little boxes, trying to connect, trying to reach out. Is there any thinking going on here? We know that these two scenarios have a lot in common. Sitting in a meeting, sitting alone, staring at a screen, have to do with focused attention. We think that thinking has to do with concentration. We believe that we work better under pressure, that when we have to decide quickly, we make better decisions. If we don't keep staring, if we stand up and take a break or move around, then we believe we're not working anymore. We're not thinking anymore. So that's what passes for thinking nowadays, is this staring, focused attention without taking a break. That's thinking. So the book was written by Daniel Kahneman. It's based on the research that he did with his very good friend, Amos Tversky. It's a difficult book to read. I know most of you have probably heard of the book. Some of you perhaps have even bought the book. Maybe some of you read the first chapter. Maybe some of you listened to the whole book on Audible. But I finally decided, after talking with lots of people, that if I didn't have a talk about this important book, that the message would get lost because the book is so difficult to read. I read it 3 times, 3 different ways, before I felt comfortable enough to talk about it and to somehow convey the content for you. So we know that this is not only an unusual book, but the author is an unusual person. He won a Nobel Prize, not for psychology, because there is not a Nobel Prize for psychology. He is a psychologist. He won the Nobel Prize for something called economic sciences. They called him an economist. And the reason for that is that he changed the way we think about thinking. We know that economics is a science, and the fundamental assumption of economics is that people are rational decision makers. He showed in his book, with the research that he did with Amos Tversky, that we are not rational. He proved it with experiments. There's science in this very difficult book. Very different from classical economics. He started a new field called behavioral economics based on science. And his results show clearly that that fundamental assumption about how we think is flawed. We are not rational decision makers. We are not logical thinkers. So not only is it a dense book full of lots of scientific experiments, the conclusion is so hard to accept, to learn, to see the science, to see the evidence that shows we're not rational decision makers. We are, as Dan Ariely says, predictably irrational. The flaws in our thinking can be studied and identified, and we make them over and over again. So my goal in this very short talk is not to cover everything in the book, but try to give you something useful from it, so that if you don't have the time or the energy to read the book, you can at least take away some of the tips, some of the suggestions, some of the ideas that will help make you a better thinker. We know that if you're in business, or if you're in programming, if you're a developer, if you're in some field of computer science, we're not a science. We don't do experiments. We make decisions based on good stories or anecdotes or case studies. So it's good for us if we pay attention to a scientific field and learn from the scientific results of others. That will help us do a better job of thinking. So the core, the essence, the heart of Daniel Kahneman's book is right here on this page. It's his model for how you think. You have two running systems, System 1 and System 2. I'm not really fond of the names, and they're really not Kahneman's. They've been in the field of brain science for decades. So we'd have to go way back and blame somebody else for the names. So we are stuck with them. System 1 is, well, we might call it the unconscious. It is not exactly the unconscious, but that's close enough. It runs below the level of awareness, and it never, ever goes to sleep. It's there 24/7. And that's a good thing, because it maintains blood pressure. It makes sure our hearts are beating. It monitors the production of hormones by all our vital organs. It's in charge of everything, our breathing. Unfortunately, it is so powerful, but we have no way of communicating with it. We don't have any way of reaching it, or seeing what it does, or understanding how it operates. We know that it's fast. Kahneman's book is called Thinking Fast and Slow. This is the fast piece of the model. We know it's fast. He calls it automatic. This is the part of our thinking that we might call intuition. It can multitask. It remembers everything you've ever seen, everything you've ever heard, everything you've ever read. The problem is, it's unconscious. We have no way of communicating with it. The speed at which it operates has been measured. It processes about 11 million bits per second. It's enormously fast. And almost everything that we do in terms of thinking is handled by System 1. The problem is we have no way of communicating with it. It's unconscious. So let's compare that with System 2, which is the conscious part of our brain. This is the part that comes alive when we wake up. So it does sleep. It's very slow. It's a linear, rational part of our brain. It forgets. It does not remember everything. And it is slow. About 40 bits per second is its maximum processing speed. And when we are awake, it talks to us. We have an image of our brain as a person, a small person who lives inside our head, who tells us what we should do and how we should think. That's System 2. Unfortunately, we think that that's what thinking is. This tiny, slow, very linear, rational part, we think that's what thinking is. When reality is, well, this is not a true picture of an iceberg, but it's a good likeness. And we know what an iceberg is. We know most of it is under water. So it used to be an image for the brain. Psychologists said, yes, our brain is like an iceberg. The unconscious mind is the part below the water. It's huge. The part above the water, that's the conscious mind. And over time, as psychologists have learned more and more about the brain, they now understand that this metaphor is not quite right. I don't know if you can see on top of the peak, the tall peak on the top, there's a little tiny snowball. If you can see that, psychologists now tell us that little snowball, that's the conscious mind. The rest of it above water and all of that below water, that's System 1, the unconscious. And what we have to learn is how to use it. Because we are stuck. We are stuck thinking that System 2 is all there is. This very slow, deliberate, linear thinker is all we got. And we are forgetting this enormous iceberg, this powerful unconscious mind. System 1, it does have a lot of flaws. They're called heuristics. It operates following some things that are really not right all the time. But all our expertise lives in System 1 and something called associative memory, whose job it is to create a story about what is happening to us all the time. And that story involves us as the hero of the story. So it's our brain's job to make up a story about what is happening in the world so that we always look good. So that we face challenges and overcome them. We interpret the facts and change them so that it fits our narrative. We, on the other hand, think that we see reality clearly, that we're objective. System 1 is loaded with biases. If you want to search on cognitive bias, you'll come up with a list, a very long list of problems with System 1. Flaws in the thinking process. I believe the worst are these three. The first one, confirmation bias. Once we believe anything, once we hold a deep belief, whether it's religious, whether it's political, whether it's technical, once we hold that deep belief, then we will filter any other information that comes our way to make sure that it does not violate our deeply held beliefs. We will actually ignore scientific evidence if it does not line up with our beliefs. We will ignore it, we will change it. We want to make sure that our beliefs stay intact. It's one of our deepest thinking flaws. And as you look around, you'll notice that other people have this flawed approach to thinking, but you will find it very difficult to see in yourself. Cognitive dissonance. We have trouble holding two conflicting ideas at the same time. Well, if there are things we don't care about, of course, we can do that easily. But if we have an investment in one point of view or another, we find it almost physically painful to even consider the other point of view. Even scientists, as they begin to experiment, to test hypotheses, they already have an investment in one outcome or another, and it's very difficult for them to be open to contrary results. And then finally, naive realism. We know there are people who don't agree with us, but we believe that if we just had the chance to explain, if we just had the chance to have a conversation with these other people and tell them, probably they haven't got all the facts. Maybe they just need someone to open their eyes. They just need a broader understanding. It's clearly something wrong with them. If we had the chance to explain it to them, then if they're smart people, they will hear what we have to say and they will understand and adopt our point of view. Naive realism, these three biases, three of our worst. And we have a whole host. Just search on cognitive bias. The problem is, now with these biases, we think we know more than we do. It's very hard for us to be humble about what we understand. We overestimate what happens. We're not comfortable with randomness. We think that we either deserve it or that we planned it, when really it was just luck. We love patterns, and I say that as a lover of patterns. Our brain works overtime to look for patterns in random data. We're not comfortable with randomness, and we have a hard time with applied probability and statistics. We don't understand risk-taking, and our brains don't do a good job of evaluating many different kinds of risky decisions. People read Thinking Fast and Slow, and they come away believing that since System 1 is so flawed, it has so many cognitive biases, that we should do our best to ignore it. And we should use the very slow, linear System 2 all the time. But Kahneman's message is not ignore System 1 and favor System 2, because he makes it very clear that System 1 contains all of your experience. You remember everything. If you could just access System 1, everything you know is located in System 1. Anything you've learned, including playing a musical instrument or a programming language, all your expertise lies in System 1. It's a powerful problem solver, and we don't use it. Kahneman himself said, "I'm one of the worst. I'm overconfident when I preach against it. Some people read Thinking Fast and Slow, hoping it will improve their minds. I wrote it, and it didn't improve my mind." These biases, these problems, they're deep, they're powerful, almost impossible to change. System 2, on the other hand, that very small, tiny snowball, that's what you're using now to listen to me, your conscious mind. It has to do with decisions about what you're going to do. Unfortunately, it takes a tremendous amount of energy, and it can only run for about 50 minutes before you must take a break. It's a good thing I'm not going to talk longer than that. That's not a joke. That's the truth. You can't focus longer than 50 minutes. If you try to force yourself, you'll find that your mind will wander on its own. It cannot effortlessly process information longer than 50 minutes. That's all you got. And then you have to take a break. Here's how we learn. System 2 helps us introduce ourselves to something new, whether it's a new programming language or a sport or a musical instrument, and we practice. In the Agile community, we talk a lot about deliberate practice. And what deliberate practice does is move this new skill, this new knowledge from System 2 into System 1. When you were a baby and you learned to walk, you practiced, you experimented, you fell down, you had to think about it. Your System 2 was working hard. It was a new skill. But now you can walk across the room and you do not have to consciously think about it. In fact, if I asked you, how do you walk? You don't know. System 1 is in charge of walking for you now. You don't know consciously how you do that. And that's true for any expertise you have, whether it's driving a car, playing a musical instrument, programming. Once you know a programming language or a particular environment, you do not have to consciously think about it. In fact, I find now that if I have to have a password to get into a particular app, if I think about it, I can't remember it. If I just type it, System 1 knows all my passwords. I just let System 1 type it. I don't even have to think about it. So in fact, if you want to get in the way of anything where you are an expert, if you ask yourself, how do I do that? Then you'll actually get in the way and your performance will go down. That's true whether you're playing golf or tennis or the violin. If you analyze it and hand it over to System 2, you're going to be slower, more deliberate, not as smooth, not as interesting. System 2 is too slow. It's good as a gateway. That's how you learn. But once you've learned it, System 1 is in charge. Now, this is a model. It has some problems. All models are wrong, but some are useful. As George Box said, it's an abstraction. Kahneman didn't look at the brain itself, the physiology. He didn't say, oh, System 2 is your prefrontal cortex. And what we know, of course, about the brain is that almost every part of it is involved in almost everything. So you wouldn't be able to draw a map and identify, well, where is System 1 in the brain? Where is System 2? So it's not really a reflection of the brain as an anatomical piece of our bodies. It's a behavioral model. It's how you think, not what parts of the brain are involved. This is another handy model. It was created by Jonathan Haidt and developed by Chip and Dan Heath to say your mind behaves like a rider on an elephant. The rider is System 2, the conscious mind. The elephant, the strong, determined, large elephant. That's System 1. And then the path, of course. So if you want to talk to somebody who doesn't agree with you, I would call up the model of the rider and the elephant, and I would take this recommendation to heart. If you have to talk to someone who doesn't agree with you, imagine that you're talking to the elephant. Don't make a logical argument to the rider. Think about what would make the elephant happy. Where would the elephant like to go? Make the path as easy as possible for the elephant. The elephant does not listen to logic or arguments, is not convinced by facts. The elephant wants to go the easiest path. And by the way, the elephant loves peanuts. System 2 takes an enormous amount of energy. I've already told you, you only have 50 minutes worth. You can actually measure that by looking at the blood glucose level. When we say pay attention, that means you're using System 2. So since you don't have as much as you would like, don't waste it. Don't waste System 2. System 2 cannot multitask. It does need energy, so you must feed it. It needs to drink. That's why you need to take breaks. In scientific experiments, we've shown that people don't make decisions as well if they are sleepy, if they are hungry, if they are thirsty, if they need to take a break. That's because System 2 has severe limitations. It needs that break. It needs to walk around. It needs to look out a window. It needs to take a nap. 1 and 2 work well together. Most of the time, System 1 is in charge. It's throwing up ideas to system 2. System 2 then goes along with it after a small analysis, and they work together quite well. What we know, though, is system 1 is in charge. System 2 likes to believe that it's in charge because it's the chatterbox that talks to you all day. But remember, system 1 never forgets. It's much better to have system 1 in charge of breathing, heart rate, the pancreas, everything that's vital to us. It's better that we don't have to consciously think, all right, breathe, everybody breathe. No, we don't even have to think about it. System 1 handles all that for us. But we know there's a penalty for using conscious decision making. This is one of my favorite experiments about thinking. There were groups of people who were asked to walk down to the end of an aisle, and they had to remember either a very long, complicated string of numbers or a short series of numbers. They said, all right, now remember this number, walk down to the end of the hallway and tell your number to the graduate student. And when you get there, that graduate student will have a treat for you. So you try to remember your number, you're rehearsing it in your mind, 236, 236, 236, 236. And when you get to the end of the corridor, you tell the graduate student, my number is 236. The graduate student said, great, I have a treat for you. You can have some nice, yummy chocolate cake or some nice, healthy fruit salad. Now, 236 is not a difficult number to remember. I wouldn't have any trouble remembering that until I got to the end of the corridor. No trouble at all. But the people in the other group had to remember 7 digits. Oh, that's a lot. I mean, if they're not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, well, that wouldn't be too bad, but they weren't. It was a complicated 7-digit number. So one group had to remember a 3-digit number, one group had to remember a 7-digit number. Would it make a difference in the treat they decided to choose for themselves? Who's going to pick chocolate cake and who's going to pick healthy fruit? Well, you know, experimenters are looking for statistical significance, and they found it. They found a statistically significant difference. Those who only had to remember 3 digits, when they got to the end of the corridor, were much more likely to pick healthy fruit. It doesn't take a lot of energy. It doesn't take a lot of work for system 2 to remember 3 digits, but 7 digits, that takes an enormous amount of energy. And when they got to the end of the hallway, they were exhausted. And since they were exhausted, they had no willpower. And when they saw the chocolate cake, they said, I want chocolate cake. Statistically significant numbers of people who had to remember 7 digits took the chocolate cake. If you, at the start of a new year, are trying to develop new habits, you want to quit smoking, you want to exercise, you want to eat healthier food, if you think you can do that when your system 2 is weakened, doesn't have enough sleep, hasn't been getting enough water to drink, hasn't been taking enough breaks, then it's going to work against you. And system 1 will take over. And system 1 does not want to exercise, it doesn't like diets, and it wants to smoke. This quote makes me cry. Given everything that's going on in the United States today, it makes me cry. This is a quote from President Obama at the time, who had behavioral economists on staff who told him, do not overuse System 2. It takes a lot of energy. You need that energy for important decisions. So he said, you'll see I only wear gray or blue. I don't need to make a decision about what to wear. I don't want to make decisions about eating or clothing. I have too many other important decisions to make. Isn't that wonderful? A president who thinks. So rule number 1, follow Obama's example. Don't spend your time on decisions that are not important. System 2 is a limited resource. Don't waste time deciding what you're going to eat or what you're going to wear. Remember, you have 50 minutes before you have to take a break. Don't spend part of that 50 minutes on deciding what t-shirt you're going to put on, unless it's important to you, of course. If it's important, then fine. But otherwise, don't waste time. Allocate the energy that needs to run System 2 for important things, not for what you're going to eat or what you're going to wear. And instead, try to take more advantage of what you can do with System 1. So I'm going to tell you a story. Before I became a computer scientist, most of you know I have a PhD in computer science, but before that, I was a mathematician. I never did finish that PhD, but I came very close. And what mathematicians do is just solve problems. And usually they think about it all the time. And at the end of the day, if you still haven't solved that problem that you are working on, sometimes you just give up and you say, I'm going to sleep now. And then you wake up in the morning and in the shower, bingo, there's the solution. If I could see all of you, I would ask you, have you ever had that experience when you gave up on working on some difficult problem and finally leaving it? Suddenly, there was the answer. It's as though it had been waiting for you. Well, now you know how that happens. System 1 has been cranking away on that problem and is just waiting for System 2 to get out of the way. And when finally I took a break and left it or went to sleep or took a shower, finally now System 1, remember, we don't have any way of communicating it, but we do know now that if you stop thinking about it consciously, that does allow System 1 to say, hey, I know the answer to this. Listen to me. But you have to get out of the way. You have to take a break. You have to get up and walk around. You have to leave it. And then wait for System 1. So many inventors, so many novelists, so many composers, so many scientists knew this. They understood somehow the power of System 1 and they used it. Here is a quote from Arthur Fry. He's the inventor of the Post-it note. He said, I back away from conscious thought. I turn the problem over to my unconscious mind. It will scan a broader array of patterns and find some new close fits from other information stored in my brain. So I knew this. I'd solved many problems simply by working on it so long and getting so tired and leaving it and finally realizing, bingo, there was the answer. The question I never asked myself was, how long do I have to work on something before System one will tell me the answer. Kahneman had to help me. So this is Linda's take on thinking fast and slow. I hope that you will adopt this and experiment with it and find what works for you, and that it will make you not only more productive, but more innovative and a better thinker. So first of all, what is the problem? Do you really understand it? Say it out loud, write it down, make sure you really understand what the problem is. Do you know enough to solve it? Do you have enough data? Then give it 10 minutes. 10 minutes, that's it. If you can't solve this problem in 10 minutes, then, and this is going to be hard until you practice. Remember, deliberate practice. You have to practice this. Leave it. Do something else. Work on another problem. Take a break. Go for a walk. Take a nap. Go to sleep. Take a shower. Do some exercise. At some point, after you leave it, System one will tell you how to solve this problem. It can't do the implementation, of course. You'll have to do that. System one is required for implementation, but you will know what to do. You will know how to solve this problem. If this doesn't happen for you in a day or so, then go back and repeat again. Try, give it another 10 minutes, but don't ever. I've taken surveys of developers around the world, and many of them are proud to say they sat staring at a screen for 13 hours working on a problem. They were overusing System 2, believing that this is how thinking and problem solving happens. And I said, you know, next time, why don't you try this? Work for 10 minutes, and if you can't get it, leave it. Go work on something else and see if perhaps that solution doesn't appear, and you will save yourself an enormous amount of time. When System 1 comes up with the answer, well, it may not be exactly what you want. System 2 will have to examine that. And you might say, well, this is all right, but maybe I could come up with something even better, and go around again, iterate again. You know more than you think you know. You don't have access to everything you know. System 1 knows everything. So hand it over to System 1, and you might be surprised at how much information, how much data you already have that will help you solve this problem. And you don't have to really do anything. System 1 is already working on it. What you have to do is get System 2 out of the way. It's too slow. It's getting in the way of your being creative. These ideas that System 1 will come up with are amazing. We know that entire symphonies have been written this way. Beethoven used to say, I go for a walk, and suddenly I see the entire symphony in front of me. Famous novelists have had entire novels written for them by going to sleep, by taking a walk, by playing with their dog, and then bingo, there it is. I'm a musician as well as a computer scientist. I have a lot of music in my house. Even in these times, we are having rehearsals in our garage. I had a piece of music I wanted to work on, and I should have known exactly where it was. It should have been filing under an alphabetical title. I should have been able to find it, and I could not. So I asked my husband, have you seen this piece of music? It's got to be here. I'm sure it's here. He said, no, I haven't seen it. I don't know where it is. And I said, well, I'm going to tear this place apart. I'm going to get this piece of music. And he came over and said, Linda, leave it. Just leave it. He was giving me my own advice. Don't you hate that? And sure enough, I said, okay, you're right. I know you're right. I'm going to work on something else. 2 hours later, right in the middle of working on a presentation, bingo, I remembered not only where the music was, but why I put it there so that I would know how to find it. My thought process at the time, I could walk right to it. System 1 knew where the music was. Just had to break through that deliberate, slow, conscious mind to say, hey, I can tell you where it is. Get out of the way. Now be careful. System 1 can multitask. You can hand over an unlimited number of things to System 1. In fact, they're trying to measure right now how many things can System 1 handle. There seems to be no limit. But System 2, on the other hand, sorry. If you think you can do more than one thing consciously, then you are setting yourself up for an automobile accident or trouble of some kind. To people who think they can multitask, I say, can you sing 2 songs at the same time? Of course not. That takes conscious effort. So System 2 cannot multitask. It's only good for focusing on one thing at a time. System 1, on the other hand, no limit. So of course you have to use System 2 to read, pay attention to a talk like now, practice, deliberate practice, go to a meeting, contribute to a meeting. Sure, anytime you have to pay attention, that's what System 2 is for. But complex problems, hand it over to System 1. In fact, these days you need to sometimes do nothing. Just hand it over and do nothing. We used to call this daydreaming. Let your mind wander. Let System 1 go wherever it wants to. We know what part of the brain is involved in daydreaming. We also know it's the part that comes up with creative ideas. If you never do nothing, that part of your brain will shrink and you won't be as creative. I don't see very many people these days doing nothing. If they have a moment, standing in line, waiting for something, they pull out their phones. They begin scrolling through all those text messages they've already read, or getting on social media and getting upset about the political situation or where is the virus headed now. They never do nothing. Think of it as an exercise for your brain. Do nothing. Let your mind wander. You'll see the benefits in creativity. Warren Buffett, I'm not sure if you know who he is, one of the richest men in the world. He said, I spend a lot of time just sitting and thinking. That's very unusual in American business or any business. I read, I think. I do more reading and thinking. That improves my decisions. Just sit and think. Daydream. Steve Jobs' favorite expression was, let's go for a walk. Let's talk while we walk. Let's think while we walk. He knew that moving was a good way of taking a break, was communicating with System 1, probably the source of all his wonderful ideas. We know that there's an ultimatum game in psychology. It's very famous. You have two players. There's a certain amount of money given to one of them, let's say $10. And that one player can divide it with the other one by saying, okay, I'll split this with you. And then if the second player accepts that money, they both get to keep it. It's real money. What psychologists have seen around the world is that if you don't make a fair offer, if you only offer, say, $2 out of the 10, that the second player is not going to take it. It's not fair. That's not rational. Both people are going to walk away with more money than they had. So they reject it. And if the second player rejects the offer, then nobody gets anything. That is not a logical decision. So then the psychologist said, wait a minute, why don't we change this game a little bit? When the second player is given the offer, why don't we say, let's wait 10 minutes and then decide? And what they found was, given 10 minutes, the second player would always take the offer, even if it wasn't fair. So if you want to improve your decisions, before you say yes or no, or I will do this, take a break, take 10 minutes, even better, go outside in nature, go for a walk, take 10, and your decisions will improve. That's what you should do in meetings. It should be okay to walk around. It should be okay to try something different. Never have a meeting that's longer than 45 minutes. And you say, well, Linda, I thought you said we had a limit of 50. Well, yes, but we always know meetings run over. So make it 45 minutes. And if you have to make a decision, take a 10-minute break before you take that final vote. Take 10. We know that you're not going to make big changes. You're a complex adaptive system. But if you try small experiments, just little steps, see if you can use some of the tips I've given you to make better decisions, solve more problems. It's something that you will do your entire life, asking yourself questions, handing it over to System 1, small steps, small experiments. The process never ends. I know that you spend so much time online. I'm really appreciative that you've spent all this time with me. I want to thank you for that and thank Stanley for inviting me. If there are questions, I'm happy to stay. So I'm going to unshare, stop sharing. Oh, good. I get to see you.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda. Yes, there are questions. All right, let me go through right from the beginning. The first question is by Ying. She asked, is System 1 also influenced by our personal experience in the past?
Yes, absolutely. That's why your System 1 sees things differently from my System 1. We are products of two things, our genes and our environment. And we are all unique because no one has that combination of genetic inheritance and environment. Even identical twins, they've shown they are different. Even though genetically they may be the same, their environment is different. So that's what causes problems in understanding, is we see things differently.
Thank you. Next question. Dear Linda, you mentioned that computer science is not really science. We don't do experiments, but make
Yeah.
decisions. What are your views on new ways of software development approach, which is experimental, using hypothesis, MVP, and validated learnings?
Yeah, we'll never do it. We will never. It's too expensive and it's too difficult because really software development is a psychological science. It's about people. So if you wanted to do what's called a randomized controlled trial, you'd have to do the same thing more than once. We can't afford to do it once. So our answer has to be small steps. We are lucky to have Sunil here, who has written about complex adaptive systems. And he will say the only way forward is to do tiny things. Probe, sense, respond. That's our only hope, is to not just make massive change and to say, oh, we are all going to do this new approach without any proof. No, we should be doing small experiments all the time. Your team might do some interesting things and I could learn from that. My team might do something else and you can learn from what I see and we can help each other. But we will never be able to do the kind of large randomized controlled experiments. If you think of what the drug companies are doing now, massive experiments to try to produce a vaccine, those must be randomized, controlled, placebo arms. We cannot do that. There's no way we can do that. But we have to be aware that we can't do it. And we have to move toward doing little tiny experiments.
Good. Next question. Do we know the percentage proportional between above and below the iceberg based on any past or current studies?
No, but I just heard a podcast yesterday that said system 2 is shrinking. So if we had an estimate, say system 1 is 95% and system 2 is 5%, that might have been okay at one time, but now the estimates showing system 2 are getting smaller because system 2 is so insignificant. It does so little. In fact, there are many evolutionary biologists who say, why do we even have it? We lived for a long time as a species without it. Many animals don't have it.
Exactly.
So the answer seems to be it's the gateway. It's how we learn new things. It helps us adapt. But other than that, it's not the big problem solver that we use it for. It's not the innovative, creative part of our brain that comes up with ideas for solving complex problems. That's system 1.
Okay, next question. I'm going to kind of randomize going through the questions as we see more questions coming. How do you prevent that 10-minute pause became procrastination?
There's nothing wrong with procrastination. See, that's that industrial age Protestant approach that we must sit, and we must stare, and we must constantly focus because that's working. Our definition is wrong. I have friends who used to work at Bell Labs when it was a big research center, and often they would just be sitting, doing nothing. And that was acceptable because everyone knew they were thinking. They were handing things over to system 1. We have somehow come to believe that unless we are actively typing, unless our fingers are on the keyboard, that we're really not thinking. That's not true. we're really many times wasting time when we're sitting, typing, staring. We're getting in the way.
Next question, why is the system 2 shrinking? Don't we utilize system 2 more and more and less of system 1?
No, okay, I probably didn't say that very well. What I mean is the estimate is shrinking. When your question was, what's the percentage? You know, they used to think the percentage was, say, 5%, but now they say, no, it's not 5%. It's not that system 2 itself is shrinking. It's that the estimate of what it contributes to our thinking, that's what's shrinking. I probably didn't say that very well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next. Okay. Thank you, Linda. There is another question, which is, if system 1 is contradicting with system 2, which system should we trust?
Don't trust either one. This is so hard because we believe in our own minds that we see reality. We trust our version of that view of reality, and we think that we see the world as it is. We see clearly. And what we need, especially in these times, is a little more humility, a little more openness to say, I'm not sure. Do I have this right? Let me talk to someone else who sees the world differently. And together, we have hope of maybe moving forward and coming up with better ideas. If we only have our own ideas, if we only trust our own conclusions, then we are going to make a lot of mistakes. And that's where we are now, especially in the US. We have two groups of people who won't talk to each other because they think the other side doesn't understand. They're stupid people. They don't see reality. We, on the other hand, we see reality clearly. We know the truth. We should have more humility and less hubris. We should be more open to listening to other people who see things differently. So don't trust either one.